Welcome to Connecting the Dots. My name is Mark Lardner. Thank you for being here. I appreciate everyone who's able to tune in live and also people who are able to catch up on this episode at some later date on YouTube. For those who are here live, make sure you use that chat box, introduce yourself to everybody else, make comments, ask questions. We'll be tracking that throughout our discussion today. So I'm excited about today's discussion. We'll be talking about the impact of natural support networks on youth in out-of-home care. And as a former child welfare worker, I have direct experience with trying to do this work and keep kids connected to family, to extended family, to kin, to friends, to the community during their time in out-of-home care. Early on in my career, I had the good fortune of hearing Kevin Campbell, the founder of the family finding model, speak rather passionately about the importance of keeping kids connections while in out-of-home care. Historically, they've connected the idea of keeping those connections current and keeping family, kin, meaningful connections, friends engaged. The idea has been that this would help the system achieve permanency for those young people in out-of-home care. For long, historically, these connections have been an important part of the work. The federal government, even Item 9 of the Federal Child and Family Services Review, is specific about preserving that youth connections while in out-of-home care, and it's housed under the permanency outcome number 2. And while this all stands to reason, evaluations of these connections have not really borne out that this has a net positive impact on legal permanency in the way we would expect. Now, certainly keeping connections is a net positive for the youth, but it doesn't seem to impact legal permanency beyond what traditional child welfare practice is. And so in those evaluations, there are some other interesting findings. One of the things that most notably stood out to me was in a study done by a former colleague of mine at the University of Maryland, Elizabeth Greeno. They did a focus group with some family finders. And in that focus group, the family finders noted that a singular focus on permanency as the outcome might be missing some of the important benefits that a youth experiences by the system maintaining those connections. And so here today, my guest is going to help us think through and talk about some of the benefits of keeping those natural support networks alive. And so he is a leading researcher in the child welfare field. He's an associate professor at Loyola University in Chicago, and he is the director of the PACE Lab, which is the Promoting Adjustment in Children Through Evaluation. So I'm very excited to welcome onto the program Dr. Scott Leon. Welcome, Scott. It's good to see you today.
Hello there. Great to see you, Mark.
All right. Well, thank you again for taking some time out of your, at this point, summer schedule. I know your semester has ended there, and you're about to head out on vacation. So I appreciate you carving out a little time to meet with us today and to talk about your research.
You bet.
All right. So I know you've been studying the impact of natural support networks for a long time, and specifically within child welfare systems. And so maybe just to start, you could talk a little bit about the evolution of how we think about natural supports and their importance, and then the things you found in your research.
Sure. Well, welcome everyone. It's so great to be able to talk to you today. And yeah, Mark, that's such an important question. When I talk to people, we have to remember where the child welfare system emerged from. Prior to the 60s, the federal government and many states were really not actively involved in kids who were maltreated and neglected. And so in the 60s, as part of a real kind of cultural change in terms of the role of government in Americans' lives, the federal government and states really start to kind of take that question on: how do we protect the well-being and safety of our children, our citizens? And what happened, though, was that the model that was used was this very typical white, European American notion of nuclear family, right?
Yeah.
And that was going to sort of solve some of the ills of single parent raising kids. Certainly there was some, racism clearly involved in that, but it was this traditional nuclear family model that we needed kids to be involved in these families. And as we know, in our culture, we see nuclear family typically as these two parents and kids together, and then there's these outer rings, right? There's aunts and uncles and grandparents, but they aren't part of that central core work. And in some cultures they don't even have a word for extended family and nuclear family. It's just
Right.
family. And I think from the very beginning, some of that cultural nuance in the forms in which family come was lost. And that was a real shame. And so from that origin, we see kids being really disconnected from the broader natural network
Mm.
because it just wasn't part of how Americans understood, at least white Americans, understood what family is. And so that was a real problem. And then for a long time, the emphasis was on getting kids to these traditional non-kin placements, right? Removing them from these situations that didn't look like the nuclear family that we know and putting them into those nuclear family setups. And then what we saw was that kids got really disconnected from family. And then, you and I talked about this the other day, Mark. Then we have the 80s and 90s, and then kinship care comes
Mm.
online. And we start to see the power and importance of families in helping to raise these kids on the way to permanency with the parents again. But what's interesting is that that nuclear family notion was still in place. So family was being brought in, but still under the nuclear family construct of what family is all about. And what
Mm.
was missed is this notion, once again, very, very culturally mediated notion of what family is. And this idea that family for some can include the entire social network, multi generational network of supports. That was missed. And it wasn't until really the 2000s where folks started asking the next question: should we be thinking about the role of the entire network in families' lives? And I think that really gets at a lot of the history there.
Yeah, and it is interesting to hear you talk about that because, again, when I started in this field, this is late '90s, early 2000s. One of my roles was to do home studies for families, and in thinking about that paperwork at the time, it was really oriented towards those ideas, this kind of idea of like a white middle class value or what that nuclear family is. So that if we're thinking about where children will thrive, the system had some really clear ideas about what they thought the best placement looked like, and those things were really not connected to that youth's family of origin. I think they did have a good amount of basis in some at the time racist ideology about
Yeah.
what counts and what doesn't count, what's good and what's bad. And so to hear you talk about that evolution, there is some hope there that things have evolved to places where perhaps our expanded worldview or expanded view of what kids need can maybe benefit inclusion, a more
Yeah.
inclusionary child welfare system.
Yeah. Well, we've turned the page before. We know we can do it. And maybe it's time for the next page.
So specifically in your research around this, then, and let's try to kind of bring this into the current, or like, uh, if you could talk to me a little bit about specifically how you looked at those natural support networks, how you kind of captured that information, and then what was the impacts you were trying to track, or what impacts you found based on your analysis of the natural support networks for youth.
Sure. So, well, first of all, I'll say, as a researcher, I have a deep appreciation for the challenge that's involved in in really bringing and including natural support network into kids' lives. Because one of the things we wanted to do was we wanted to look at how many support networks or how many support persons there were in the kids' lives as part of this research. So we developed a file review document where we were able to list out in the document each and every single potential relative that was involved or potentially involved in the child's life and which support activity they might have been involved with. So you might have, let's say, a maternal aunt, and that would get listed on the file review form. And then we had a series of, based on the literature, a series of potential support activities that which they could be involved with the child. So um, support around transportation, getting the child to an event, or helping get mom to her AA meetings, attendance at the kids support events, attendance at educational meetings, simple visits with the child, respite opportunities, childcare after school. So we really try to create sort of a big basket here of potential support activities. And then what we did is we went into Sanquis, and as a team, we just went through and and read about, in Illinois, we have what's called an integrated assessment. It's basically a psychosocial history.
Okay.
We went through and culled as much information about the natural support network as we could from that document. And where it was indicated, the involvement support type, we would write that on the form and just try to collect that. But knowing that any document is not a complete document, we then set about interviewing caseworkers, actual phone interviews with caseworkers. This was also an intervention. So in the intervention group, we interviewed the family finders to say, hey, here's what we found in the written document. Can you add anything to this? And we knew this was very important because we know that the SACWIS Illinois Integrated Assessment is a static document, and that we can build more upon that as we get to know the child. That was really hard. I mean, you can imagine getting out there and really trying to get caseworkers on the phone. They're busy folks, but we did it. We got 90% of all our caseworkers and family finders on the phone and said, hey, can you confirm what was in this SACWIS file review? And also, is there anyone else you've met along the way? Any other relatives? And how are they involved? Or how have they been involved? What are they doing in the child's life? So that's kind of how we went about it.
And so, yeah, and so in one, I think the unenviable task of having to read through SACWIS system records, I commend you on that. But the idea to reach out to people, I've kind of two questions there. One, how much alignment was there? Did you feel like in those records you were able to capture as much as a good bit of what was going on with those families? Or was it in the conversations that you gathered kind of the more meaningful nuance of the importance of what was going on with those natural supports? And then I guess finally, then what did you find? Like what was the impact of youth
Sure.
with the networks?
I would say we probably identified an additional 30 to 40% of relatives that were not in the SACWIS system. And then even among those who were in the system, there were support activities that were not identified. So there might have been, let's say, a relative in the SACWIS system where they said they visit the child, but we then found out that they've provided respite, transportation, and any number of support activities. So there's nothing like a good old-fashioned conversation to really get a feel for what's going on in the child's life. And then in terms of what we did with those data, so that allowed us to, at first we did it somewhat crudely. We were able to create kind of a composite of, just basic summing of support activities. And for any child, we could, assign a value. How many total natural support activities are brought to bear in this child's life? Okay. And that was this sum variable. And then we tried to use that to predict outcomes. So we used the CANs, and we were able to predict longitudinally children's externalizing and internalizing concerns. Internalizing meaning those CANs items around, anxiety, adjustment to trauma, depression, self-harm. Externalizing your conduct, oppositionality, other harm, and things like that. And what we found was that this relative support variable, right, was first of all, it's a huge predictor of longitudinal outcomes for these kids. Okay. In fact, it was a bigger predictor of kids' longitudinal emotional and behavioral outcomes in the positive direction than maltreatment was in the negative direction, meaning it was a more powerful variable in predicting positive outcomes than maltreatment was in predicting what we would expect it to predict, which is negative outcomes. Right. That just gives you a sense of the power of this family variable in influencing kids' emotional and behavioral outcomes.
And it does kind of get back to that brief quote, which was kind of buried in this research article, where out of a focus group, the family finder themselves thought, this has immense benefits. We're just not looking in the right place. And I think to your research, when we start to look at these longitudinals, it is, maybe it does kind of turn on its head the way we traditionally think about mental health issues within children and the child welfare system and the things we're doing to try to ameliorate those, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, some of the best models of clinical care out there look at kids from a multi-systems perspective, You look at multi-systemic therapy,
Right.
right? The whole idea, I mean, the multiple systems is built into the title.
Right.
And if you look at MST, you'll see, I mean, one of the things they advocate for is reaching out to the natural support network. So I think we really understand the value of family in our work. The question is, are we doing the work? I think that's really the question that this boils down to. In my book, there's two, you got to do two things. First of all, you have to ask the question, does family matter? You know,
Yeah.
is it really about this nuclear home-based family, or do these natural supports really make a difference? And once you know the answer to that, then you can say, all right, well, if it is important, what is it going to take to really get them in the tent and get
Right.
them involved? And my research, I think, indicates that it's a huge, huge impact, and it's hugely important. And so that brings us to that next question, which is, okay, now what do we do? What do we
Yeah.
do to really, really engage these folks and bring them in to the child's life for their benefit?
Yeah. And so let's maybe, obviously you and I cannot solve all the problems of the child welfare system, but I do think it's maybe worth just taking a couple of minutes to explore that. And the way I traditionally think about this question of like, what would it take is, I don't know if you think similarly, but the first idea is, well, what are the current barriers or challenges that could get in the way of us being more inclusive, of finding or including these natural supports? And I'd be curious from your perspective in spending time with this, are there ones that you've come across that you say, yeah, this is a consistent barrier to, you know, connecting with these people, bringing these natural supports into the traditional child welfare work?
Well, I think that the number one barrier is that family's messy,
Hmm.
and we all know that.
No doubt.
My
Yeah.
family, my extended family, and in-laws and all that, it's messy, and it is for most of us. I want to meet the person who says family's not messy.
Me too.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And when you start to engage family, you have the potential to really open a can of worms. I mean, let's say the parent has a drug history and the child's in foster care, and you start to reach out to some of these relatives, and you might find that this parent stole money for drugs.
Yeah.
There might have been some real difficult, painful altercations and estrangements and things like that, and now you're reaching out to these relatives. That's tough. That's
Yeah.
tough work. And I think a lot of folks, caseworkers and others, and I don't criticize them for this, they sort of smart from that. That's tough. That's tough to do. Again, the question is it worth it? Is it worth the effort and the work to really almost do some family systems work away when you think about it,
Yeah.
to get them involved? I think that's really there are other barriers too. You and I spoke about this recently. I mean, look at child and family team meetings. I remember I went through the research literature. Oh, I don't know, about a year ago, and I was really struck by how few people come to these child and
Yeah.
family team
Yeah.
meetings. When these CFTs were created, the idea, whether it was in the wraparound system or any of these other programs out there, the idea was, you're going to get all these relatives there. The family pastor is going to show up. The teacher might even come. The therapist, this and that. I mean, the idea was we're really going to bring these people together. That was the dream,
Yeah.
right? That dream has not borne out.
No.
It simply has not borne out. And when you look at who comes to these child and family team meetings, it's the foster parent, hopefully, it's the caseworker, maybe the therapist, and maybe another relative. And that's really often it.
Yeah. I think there's a connection between those two barriers, right? And
Oh,
so, and I think you and I share this opinion that the child welfare workforce, by and large, is overwhelmed,
yeah.
uh, undersupported, and doing tremendously challenging work in the face of all of that, right? So, but the idea, and even I can remember myself saying, like, yeah, I don't know if this is a great idea to open this can of worms by calling all these people and seeing what's going on. I
Right.
also remember going out to, when I started to get more involved in this work, going out to some houses and thinking, one, what am I doing here? And then
Mm,
two, being bombarded with, you know what, while you're here, I actually do need all this other help, and feeling like, man, I already don't have enough time to do the work I'm
mm,
supposed to be doing. And here I am trying to figure out, can I support this other person because I'm making an ask of them, and they're making a legitimate ask of me. They need some
Yeah.
help too. And I quickly developed my skill of just saying, hey, that's actually, I can refer you to somebody else. I'm not able to support that. But I do think perhaps that maybe thinking about this as the responsibility solely of the child welfare caseworker
Mm.
is perhaps in itself a mistake, right? And that
Yeah.
including other people in the system to say that this is the work of a team of people, not a singular person, might be a way to address both of those barriers that I think you raised that are important ones.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree with you 100%. I mean, I think asking an already stressed caseworker workforce to do the kind of family engagement that I think is necessary is simply not practical.
yeah,
And in addition, I think if we can get a workforce, and I know this is a big this is a big lift, but if we can get a workforce whose job it is to singularly focus on engaging natural support net, that's their job, that's what we hold them accountable for, and really get them out there doing this work, that they can then work with the caseworker to really integrate that engagement piece with the casework with the plan, you know.
yeah,
And in my imagination, the way this looks is that you've got sort of family engagement specialists and caseworkers co-located at the same facility. They work in teams, right? And they hold each other accountable. I mean, they have to see each other at the water cooler, right?
mm,
So if
yeah,
the caseworker hasn't called, Aunt so and so to find out if she can help with transportation, that caseworker is to think, oh yeah, I did mention I was going to do that, and that might make them want to do it more. I mean, that's how it is for all of us, right?
right,
We're held accountable by the people we run into, and vice versa. And so, I think if we could do that, that would be to me an ideal model. Specialized family engagement folks co-located at the same caseworker agency would be
yeah.
would be a good start.
I agree. I think, and again, that idea of a specialized person, this can be. We have lots of these people who could specialize this that we're already connected to. I think there's been a big movement around kin care and how to use like kinship
Right.
navigators. I think could be a helpful role in that. And then these other people with lived experience, people with engaged in the system from all walks of life. I think similar to what you're suggesting, like a really expanded view of what the child welfare workforce looks like, and a creatively trying to see how it can be enhanced. And so, it's nice to hear you talking about this because, like, in your expression there, it sounds like there's still some hope for these kinds of things. And maybe an additional lever I'd be curious is uh, knowing that sometimes we, as John likes to say, you cannot manage what you don't measure. Um, a couple of the key elements that you seem to call out, right, sort of like who these people are and what actions. I'm probably misphrasing your word, but like what the actual support they're providing. Is there a space in our current kind of child welfare data collection to start to maybe key in on these things? And what would be your thoughts on how that would happen, or how those hurdles could be cleared?
Well, you and I spoke earlier about, we don't see it mentioned in AVCARs or the CFSRs, and maybe that'd be a good place to start.
Yeah,
Is just having this as an indicator, um, and we could even, in terms of measurement, we like to measure things we can count,
right.
but we could count how many relatives a caseworker or a family engagement worker has contacted.
Right.
I mean, that's just a start. I don't know how that accountability piece might look. I would say this is an accountability piece that's a little harder.
Yeah,
You know, it's not like how many days was the child kept in their placement, how many placement disruptions were there, or time to permanency. It's not as clean as that, which is
yeah,
tougher, right?
yeah.
But it doesn't mean we can't do it. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are as someone who's been in that world.
So, I mean, I will say that just at risk of just pounding the same drum, the the SACWIS records that I've spent tons of time looking through, I'm always left with feeling like we so rarely talk about action in our work. And hearing you discuss the way you were trying to tackle this, it was not solely about was there documentation of who is around, right, who the family is, but how they're being utilized, right? And so I think our ability to identify things we can count, but additionally, make sure we're capturing the actions that the system, the people connected to that youth are taking and where that work is. I do think, I know that you use the cans to try to measure some of
Oh yeah.
those longitudinal outcome stuff, those internalizing, externalizing behaviors from but in a lot of the trainings I still end up doing, I think the strength section, which really is focused on the utility of those strengths, not do they have an asset or resource, but is that asset or resource useful? The idea of natural supports, family, relationship permanence, those key ones, perhaps systems that are using those tools could say these things perhaps should be prioritized, right? If we know that they have a singular important impact on this young person's well-being, how do we make sure we prioritize some of the things that we're already doing or the information we're already collecting?
I agree. I agree 100%. And I do think we need to really rethink how we're doing child and family team meetings.
Yeah.
I just think this whole has not lived up to what we first imagined. And I've wondered, and I'm not in the field, but I've wondered whether or not we need to start thinking about, instead of having the child and family team come to us as providers, if we need to start thinking about what we need to do to bring the child and family team to them, to the community. And that might mean going out, just like what you did, Mark, going out and visiting the family member and talking to them. Maybe they don't all have to be, downtown at the office at 2 p.m. on a Thursday when everyone's working or got other childcare things, which is maybe why we're only getting 3 people showing up. Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we need to do some shuttle diplomacy and working with the different. That's tough work. But maybe we need to reimagine child and family team meetings and how we engage family. And that's, I think, a question I'd love for us as a child welfare community to get into.
Well, me as well. And I think that's a perfect note to kind of end on. Perhaps you and I will be able to pick up this conversation at some point too, this reimagining of how we're moving these systems to systems of care to systems that care. I know we're going to have those discussions at the TCOM conference coming up as well. But thank you immensely for your time today. Thank you for the work you're doing in this corner of child welfare. I think it has, the more we can highlight it, the better. So I appreciate you coming on today and being able to talk to us on connecting the dots.
You bet, Mark. Thank you so much. You and I are just our minds were formed in the same crucible. I can tell that. I can talk to you for hours.
Me too.
But it's wonderful to talk to you. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. All right. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. That kind of wraps our episode today of Connecting the Dots. I really do appreciate folks being able to join us. We are going to take a brief hiatus here for the summer. We'll be back in 3 months. Our next episode of Connecting the Dots is September 12th. Same time as always, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And, don't forget to click that like if you're watching this on YouTube. Click the like and go to the TCOM channel and click subscribe. Tap that bell icon to make sure you're getting the updates about new videos posted on the TCOM channel. All right, so again, before we part, a couple quick reminders. You should see right underneath me some QR codes. The first one is about the Tales from the Collaborative. We have a new episode up with Sharuk Chisti. And so the great Tim Fall interviews Sharuk. Is a wonderful interview. It kind of, as I was listening to the other day, it did bring a smile to my face. And I hope to see Sharuk when we're at the TCOM conference. Additionally, I think there's another episode, or we're on the gram, as the kids say. So how do you do, fellow kids? So please follow us on Instagram. We're not necessarily interested in your vacation or your cat photos, but we do want to make sure that you're keeping up to date on all the things that are going on in the TCOM world on Instagram. We have another episode of Equip Live scheduled for June 22nd. I think Bob Lieberman is going to be the guest on that. I'm excited to hear what he has to say about reunification and achievement of permanency. And so Please join us on June 22nd for that. And finally, and probably most importantly, that TCOM conference is coming up rather fast. It's October 4th through 6th. I know that Lizzie Minton, the conference committee chair, and the rest of the conference committee has been working hard so that this conference is an amazing experience. So please don't hesitate, register for the conference, and you can go to tcomconversations.com to find all that information about how to register for our TCOM conference in Lexington, Kentucky this year. All right, well, I do really appreciate the help of all our Connecting the Dots crew, Zach Shootman, Tim Fall, Kyle Sprague, and especially Lauren Mergen, who keeps us on track, gets us organized, and makes sure all this stuff comes together on time. So I hope everyone out there has an enjoyable summer, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Connecting the Dots. Have a good day.